And welcome back. The hashtag is NewsGang. We're already seeing quite a bit of your feedback on our discussion on cancer. But one of the things that we talked about is the economy and corruption and how that is affecting healthcare. Well, you know, the economy is being felt, or the growth is not being felt everywhere. In fact, just this week, the governor of central bank said you cannot eat GDP. So in as much as we're talking about high growth, how is it that an economy is growing by 6.3%, but there are job losses, but there is no money in your pocket? Let's listen to what the IMF and the Treasury Economic Secretary said about the state of the economy.
Targeting between 0.5 and 1 percentage point of GDP in revenue mobilization per year, we feel would be consistent with what other countries have been able to achieve around the world.
We need to focus more on concessional borrowing because it's much easier to bear the burden of concessional borrowing. And what we're doing is looking at scaling down our commercial borrowing up to a point where it is manageable. Of course, that will not happen in 1 year, but over time, if you look at our fiscal consolidation path, in the next 3 years we'll be in a very comfortable level in terms of borrowing.
So now, a lot of the times, these are the numbers and figures and terminology: GDP, debt to GDP ratio, growth 6.3%. But Joe, I mean, we don't understand these terms, and no matter how big they sound, the only thing we know is hakuna pesa.
That the pocket is the bottom line. I think, and that yes. that is how I think why the central bank governor also famously said that you cannot eat GDP, because GDP in a sense is a percentage. It measures economic activity, but the economy could be happening, so to speak, in specific sectors. Like in our case, is fueled a lot by all this construction of big construction projects, big infrastructure projects that taking money, and there is a semblance of activity, but at the end of the day, they don't translate into economic fortunes of the citizens changing within the short term. So we are seeing all these things, and the figures suggest that the economy is growing, but that money is not trickling down to Wanjiko, as we call her in this country. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important thing. The second thing about percentages is that sometimes when you say this thing is happening at this percentage, growing at this percentage, but when you go inside that percentage, who is there? Growing for who? You see, because it could be just a few people who are fueling that growth, and the rest of us are sitting there waiting for the trickle down that never happens. So until you drill down and see what are the absolute numbers, what is really happening to the individuals that are within these aggregate numbers, you can't quite tell. And I think that's the situation here, where even the World Bank today, in giving those projections, is saying, well, the economy is growing. Next year it will be 0.3 or something, but you still won't feel it much in your pocket, and that is where we have been for a while now. And the rubber meeting the road, you said the bottom line is the pocket. Yeah. So a lot of individuals are now tightening their belts. And you can see the inflation figures are going October up. Yeah, went up almost 2%. And being fueled by the increase in prices of food. Yeah. So we are tightening our belts, but Francis, now so is the government.
Yes, but you see, economy is also about figures. Yeah. Look at the amount of money that the government is making in revenue vis-a-vis the budget that we are working on, especially for financial year 2019-2020. Look at what has happened in the last, let's say, 1 year, and see whether there are more jobs being created. That would hence mean more revenue for the government directly because of pay as you earn. Look at the number of people who are doing business. Are they now able to import more so that they can trade locally, so that the government can also get import duty? The answer, unfortunately, is no. Look at the acting cabinet secretary for National Treasury, Ukuri Atani, was meeting the budget committee on past Friday. And for the first time, he gave an indication that the state of our economy is not very good. The statistics for the first quarter of financial year 2019-2020 indicates that the total cumulative revenues for that period amounted to 410 billion shillings against a target of 495 billion shillings. That's a shortfall of 84.6 billion shillings. And for ordinary revenues, there was a shortfall of 60.2 billion shillings. What does that mean? We are not doing very well.
We're living beyond our means.
Yet, the last financial year, the target was missed by about 100 billion. This financial year, the target is higher by about 200 billion shillings. So what are you saying? The KRA has to collect what it didn't collect the last financial year. Plus. Yet, there's nothing that you can say is equivalent investment that would generate revenue. Look at the number of people who have lost jobs in the last, let's say, 1 year. I'm looking at a table here. It indicates that among the cumulative revenue collection, in terms of shortfall, import duty, the shortfall is about 7.2 billion shillings. Excise taxes, the shortfall is about another 7.4 billion shillings. Pay as you earn is, I'm looking at it, pay as you earn is about 12 billion shillings. Shortfall, 12 billion shillings.
So we have shortfalls everywhere.
If companies are downsizing, that means people are going away.
That means they're not paying pay?
They're not paying pay.
Okay.
If the traders in Nyamakima and River Road, in Kirinyaga Road and other places are having difficulties getting what they got out, I mean, what they imported, you remember the saga about the traders, it means the government is losing in terms of income tax,
excise duty,
and pay, and everything else. So, I mean, we also need to be a bit realistic. Look also at some of the policies that the government has come up with. You remember this whole row about tax evasion, closure of some companies because of, these tax measures and the enforcement. I'm not saying that companies should not pay taxes and tax evasion is bad. But while doing it, also work in such a way that you don't hurt the economy that you're trying to protect by revenue collection.
Indeed.
Otherwise, we will continue to be in the red, borrow more, increase the debt burden, use a lot of our revenue at source to service the debt.
Yvonne, Gashodi speaks of small businesses, and a lot of these small businesses are unable to access loans now. Banks are not giving loans to small businesses and households because of the interest rate cap. In fact, banks would rather give loan to the government because they know serikali italipa madeni yake. And what does this mean? It translates to the small business maybe having to shut down, not grow, not employing, forced to let go of people who are already employed. And this now trickles down to what we said, that if one person is fired, what does that mean for the rest of their family? 3-4 other people will be affected. In the media yesterday, there was the unfortunate retrenchment of about 160 people from another media house. And I think about them and their families and how that would affect them. And remember, we were mentioning this, Yvonne, that since March this year, until August, about 388 companies have closed down through, of course, statistics from the Register of Companies. And it tells you now how badly the country is doing. Another an indicator is that if you look at the newspapers on Mondays, you have about 6 pages of auctions. Exactly. So you have auctioneers there, you see, and it's by law, actually, that if you are doing an auction, you have to at least put it in the leading daily. And then now, the other side of it is that, yes, there are things to be auctioned, but there's no one to buy them.
Yes, I remember Joseph Bonyo saying that.
Gave us that example. And now during the sports segment, we had Ndong saying that is what's happening to now the rugby union in Kenya, that they had a debt of 4 million from the year 2014, services that were delivered during the Safari Sevens. Wow. And now that is the situation in sports. Things are not looking good. It really is,
it is a big one. You've painted that issue. Also, government is cutting back its projections by 130 billion. But Linus, a lot of this is tied to policy, a lot of this is tied to leadership, and not just at the person who's in Treasury, but at the person who's on the House on the Hill.
Yes, Yvonne, I think I mentioned here in our last show that it's very worrying that we do not really have a face around which our economic wellness can be discussed. Right now we have an acting finance CS. But this doesn't mean that the government doesn't have brilliant people. You saw in the IMF briefing, some of those Kenyans that work there do know what is going on. But what they really need to also know is, as Kenyans say, you talk about figures, talk about GDP, the situation on the ground is different. And I want us to go to the ground just to illustrate what I really think is also going wrong, which is in the rural areas, in the spaces that people never really needed government for them to get along. Let's just listen to what the Senate encountered when it visited Eldoret and met farmers there. Let's listen to this.
Murgumin Jararge nilisoma na baba yako 1954. Nyinyi siku zinahesabika. Kunyongwa eri kukuba kuliko kuishi Kenya. Mnasikia? Eri kukuba kuliko kuishi Kenya. Eri kipo kabisa. Watoto wanaenda cheza na sisi namna gani? Weta na Orengo na Moi. Nyinyi ni senior. Inji hawezi endeshwa namna hii hata nyumba yako.
Thank you for earning 1 million plus. Sisi wakulima hapa, watoto wetu hawaendi shule. Yours, I know they are in Australia. They are in United States of America.
Wakulima hawa wanashuku nyinyi kwamba nyinyi ndio kateli wakubwa. Huo ndio ukweli wa mambo. Huyu mnyama anaitwa kateli ni nani ambaye nyinyi hamwezi kumtaja? Ukifika huko ati kuna katela anakula serikali. Ukifika huko kuna katela anayekula cereal. Kwani huyu kateli ni mbwa mwitu?
Tunaimba hapa Kiswahili kizuri, Kiingereza kizuri, lakini hakuna inakuishia sanduku ya Senate. Recommend, wewe unajua kuzungumza sana, zungumza mahindi leo. Mahindi ilitoka kwa Mexico, ilikuwa ya nani?
Mumekuja hapa kututanganya. Mumekuja hapa kutuweka sisi merry-go-round. Maneno ya 2022 watu wetu nakupa hapa ribarol kama nzike. Sisi tuko na tabu ya kutosha. Hii watu mnapoona namna hii tuna tabu. Mahindi ndani ya sito, mahindi ndani ya cereal, mahindi sasa tayari kwa shamba. Na mnakuja tu kutuchekelea haki ya Mungu.
You see, even the rural areas used to be a safe zone when it comes to whatever economic conditions the country is going through, whether it's through President Moi's austerity years, which were very, very tough. They had to cut on the size of civil service. But the one thing that was really intact is the farmer can plant their maize, they can feed their families, and they can sell a bit of that maize to cereals. That is an economy. We don't all have to rely on the state. What has happened in the last few years is the systematic and progressive destruction of what used to be dependable. It's not just the maize sector. Go to Western Kenya. Sugarcane farming used to be the mainstay. Look at what used to be very safe. Tea and coffee. Have you seen people approaching tea and coffee? These are very, very bad signs. This
Over 1,000 people lost their jobs in the tea sector.
In the tea sector.
Yeah.
Coffee, which was, I mean, that's an export crop. Then we talk of new crops like horticulture, with new sectors like horticulture, which, got off to a very, very good start. A lot of them are now, closing down. They lay people off, and they are moving to what they are calling friendlier environments like Ethiopia, where the cost of doing business is perhaps cheaper. We need to address these situations on the ground. It's not about the figures they read in hotels. It's about that farmer who is now having to plead with government. I come from Narok County, and I remember when we were in secondary school, harvest of wheat used to be a big time in that part of the country. They were proud farmers bringing wheat to the town and selling. The economy was working very, very well. As long as we don't address these issues around the ground, We used to call agriculture the backbone of the economy.
Is it?
What part of the body is it now? Now that because I don't think it's a backbone anymore.
And Yvonne, I was quite intrigued by what happened. I mean, even the clips we were watching, and these are people who are, you can tell they're speaking from the bottom of their hearts. They're actually talking about problems that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, and it underscored the place of leadership, what you are asking about. And these people know that you are the people that we've elected to go there to speak for us, to fix these things. In fact, one of the more interesting articles I was reading this week from environmentalist Dr. Isaac Alu, and was comparing leaders to pace setters, more like from the Eliud Kipchoge thing, that these are the people who set the pace, that whatever they are doing up there is supposed to determine then what happens to all of us. Because if they go to Parliament and they do something with the debt, for example, it comes back to all of us. If they go to Parliament and create an environment that then allows for businesses to thrive and jobs are created and that sort of thing. But these people know. They are telling them, look, where are your children going to school? And here we are. Here we are. Yeah, and then the guy just said, thank you very much for earning $1 million shillings.
Yeah, and I think that's the face of the farmer. Did you notice just the difference in how they look? Yeah. The farmer, the leader. You know, farming is an agriculture. I mean, hats off to farmers in this country who feed us every day, but it's really a thankless job. But I want to move this quickly because not only are the farmers feeling the pinch of the economy, but suddenly now the judiciary is also having to tighten its belts, right, Francis?
Absolutely. And even before we get there, there's something I was itching to say. On June 1st, 2019, at Narok Stadium, you remember the president issuing a directive that all pending bills must be paid by the end of financial year 2018-2019. You remember that directive?
Yes.
At that time, the county governments were owing people 108 billion shillings. Up to now, only 10 billion shillings has been given to county governments to pay the people they owe. So county governments still owe guys who supplied over 90 billion shillings. And that was for the last financial year. Look at this financial year, we're already in the first quarter. So county governments have incurred more debt. So you can imagine county government probably have a debt of about 120 billion or thereabout. And you're not even speaking about the 400 billion shillings that the national government owes suppliers. What does that mean? If I had borrowed from Linus to supply the government, expecting to be paid so that I can pay him back, it is not happening. So I don't have money. Linus doesn't have money. If I had borrowed from the bank and attached my vehicle or a piece of land or my house, those are the things that you're seeing auctioneers deal with in those 5 pages of newspapers. So it's terrible.
But they're saying that now the auctioneers are also having problems because no one wants to buy those things that they're auctioning.
Where is the money? In fact, and speaking about the money, the judiciary is also saying it doesn't have the money. This is as a result of a circular that was issued by the acting cabinet secretary for National Treasury, Ukuri Atani, last month in September, asking all the levels of government to now start tightening their belts. Some places up to 50% cuts in terms of expenditure. And we've seen the judiciary issue notices to close some courts, downsize others, and so on and so forth.
They closed Nyeri and Malindi courts of appeal.
Yeah, but that decision, Yvonne, by the cabinet secretary doesn't sound right, because budget making is largely a parliamentary process. So the cabinet secretary cannot wake up and say, slash the budgets. In any case, it is the function of Parliament to say, we have considered those cuts, but via a supplementary budget, which is yet to hit the floor of the House.
Absolutely, and that's why people are saying, I mean, listen, there is no doubt that we are living in austere times, and that some tightening of the belt needs to happen. Like you said, did the executive follow the right procedure?
No.
Perhaps not. Also remember that this money that they are slashing from the judiciary has already been committed to certain functions. So, and it has been budgeted for. Treasury can then not touch it. It can only reduce it in the next financial year or go through Parliament and go through a supplementary budget. But here's the reason why some might be saying, well, yes, we are living in hard times, but this may also be revisited. You cannot look at this in isolation, to say, okay, things are tough and judiciary must also understand. Fair enough. However, there have been a number of incidents that state that this might also be one of those issues used to fix the judiciary. Take a look at what happened with the appointment of Justice Wasame to the JSC. That was delayed up until somebody had to go to court. Look at the revision of budgets in this financial year. And by the way, it's not just this financial year, but the previous one, where I think they'd asked for a big amount of money, and that was then slashed, and they were not allocated everything there. So that was in the last financial year. And then you take a look at the president and his refusal to appoint 41 judges to the Court of Appeal, even when they have been passed by the JSC. There again, the president cites the issue of economics and says, you know, we don't have the money, and also integrity questions, which is, you know, another matter altogether. Interesting that he has integrity questions about all 41 judges. Interesting that the president himself has not one, but 4 representatives on the JSC. That's the Attorney General, 1 man and 1 woman that are appointed by the president, and also, you know, a representative from the public service. These issues never came up. The first person he should be questioning are his representatives on the JSC. So fine, yes, everyone needs to tighten their belts. But if you take a look at what's happening in the judiciary with respect to the budget cuts, in context of everything else that has happened, iko issue ya judiciary revisit. So this, of course, takes us back to the president and his very famous statement now on revisiting the judiciary following that ruling nullifying his election by the Supreme Court. I want us to listen to that now, just so you can see where this all began.
The presidential election held on 8th August 2017 was not conducted in accordance with the Constitution and the applicable law, rendering the declared results invalid, null, and void.
Si tumekubali na tumesema amani, lakini wajue hawa watu 5 wa 6, kwa sababu Wakenya bado wataamua, watugojee baada ya uamuzi wa wananchi. Tuko na hawa hapa kwa hapa, tuko na wao hapa kwa hapa.
We have a problem with our judiciary, but regardless, we respect, but we shall revisit.
Yes.
There you go.
You know, this reminds me of a book we used to read in high school called Kinjeketile. There was something about mutu aliza neno likawa kubwa kuliko mutu or something like that. Yeah, that actually, it is, in my view, one of those statements you make and it haunts you forever. Because you see, right now, there could be problems. There could be financial problems. There could be need for everyone, including the judiciary, to tighten their belt. But because there was what looked like a very specific, you know, usually we say veiled threats, but this one was not veiled at all. I mean, it was in the open, and he was saying, ngoja tu tutaonana na hapo kwa hapo. And so that is something that I think the president needs to convince the country. It's something that he may need to address himself and say, okay, there is no problem. This is what I meant, or I misspoke, as they say in the US these days. But it is not something that will just go away because now time has passed or there's handshake or whatever. It is a tag that he carries, that he has a grudge against the judiciary that came out of that presidential petition, whether rightly or wrongly. But because he said those words and he is the president and he's in charge now, and there are certain things happening in the judiciary, he has to carry that burden.
Yeah, and I just want to, just a footnote. You see, it's not just what he said about revisit, but it's been his actions after which have backed that statement. Wasame, the 41 judges, the revision of budget. So he's actually followed his words with some very serious action.
Actually, on the same note, let's look at it in terms of separation of powers. We have the judiciary, the executive, and parliament. And as it stands, the judiciary is sort of like a co-equal organ of the government of Kenya, and it's not supposed to be senior executive to be told what to do, and that worries me in terms of now service delivery to the people. We had mentioned that 2 courts of appeal in Nyeri and Malindi were closed down. It's going to affect a lot of cases in those areas. And if you look at Article 48 of the Constitution, it says that the state is required to ensure justice for all. And these people in Nyeri and Malindi who require a court of appeal to look at their cases are already not getting their right. 2, you've mentioned it, and also we say it all the time, that the control of budget said that 1/3 of the money the country has gone to corruption. Tunasema tunafunga mkanda, tunasema tunataka kupunguza spending, na huku pesa zinapotea kwa ufisadi. Now, lastly, we've had several instances where the government says, oh, we are going to put measures to try and curtail our spending. But I think sometimes we just talk and there's no action that follows that talk. Tunatumia pesa hivyo na tunachezea, and now this is what happens.
You know, like what Joe is saying about that Kinjeketile. For now, currently, is there evidence that the judiciary can show to say our budget has been slashed? Is there? Because so far, Parliament has not approved any budget cuts so far. It was a circular that was issued by the Cabinet Secretary to all agencies, just prepare for ABCD, like a guideline of sorts. But you see, for the judiciary, because of that revisit statement, whenever anything happens in the judiciary in terms of, let's say, finances, or any situation that you feel like their independence is being taken advantage of, the judiciary will always go back to that statement. We are being revisited. Linus, independence, financial independence, isn't it at the top of that independence? If you're not financially independent, then it becomes a problem.
The judiciary should enjoy two types of independence, if I can divide it that way. One is constitutional, and the second one is operational. They should not be interfered with by any other institution. That is how the drafters of the Constitution envisaged it. And the judiciary has one lucky thing to count on, and that is the Constitution of Kenya 2010. It's very, very robust, protects security of tenure when it comes to judges, protects the independence of judicial officers. They can make the decision they ought to make as in the best wisdom they can, and nobody is supposed to interfere with them. But on the issue that Joe has addressed here, on the issue of revisiting, when it comes to the Court of Appeal, it could be very, very easy to actually see some of the games that are going on there. Two institutions. One is the Court of Appeal, and another one is the JSC, where you can quite clearly see an attempt to tilt things a certain way. Now, the beauty of our judiciary, and I've interacted with quite a number of them, and a lot of them, we have fantastic people in the judiciary. It doesn't matter what community they come from or what political persuasion they hold. None of them, I have not seen any of them that has been unwise enough to imagine that there'll be a day or the country will go back to the days where the judiciary is controlled by the executive. I think any politician also dreaming in terms of that kind of direction should really wake up to the reality, because progress moves forward. And one of the areas that the country has made great strides in is in the judiciary independence. I mean, this country became one of the very few that have ever nullified a presidential election on very strong grounds that can be argued, that were argued in an open court. That is courage. That's judicial independence. I mean, judges were not killed because of that. Of course, there were a lot of threats that followed, but we are grateful that it never went beyond that. So it is a dream. If Jubilee, President Uhuru Kenyatta, are dreaming of the days of President Moi, Jomo Kenyatta, where they can actually get decisions from court that are not in line with the laws, it's going to be very, very difficult. And the way things have been structured as well, and you look at the list of the nominees that are slated for Court of Appeal, you're looking at very, very independent minds out there. Not easy to play with. You can look at their decisions before they go these appointments. They are independent, sound jurists.
Absolutely. And we could have said a lot more. Because if it is a question about integrity, the judges, the 11 judges especially who are supposed to be appointed to the Court of Appeal, 10 are coming from the High Court. And if you review some of the decisions that they made, were very, very independent. And probably there's some discomfort of sorts I would dare say, in my opinion, that if some of these judges end up in the Court of Appeal, it may be a bit uncomfortable for some quarters. Probably that could explain the situation that we are in. And so in the event that the president is disappointed with those nominees, can he say, I will not appoint them?
Nope.
The process goes one way. If we are talking of the ones that were appointed, basically moving from the High Court to the Court of Appeal, there is a very clear way of removing a judge. Initiate a process through the JSC and have that heard and determined.
And if you're saying they have integrity issues so that they don't proceed to the Court of Appeal, then what are they doing at the High Court?
Exactly.
Because integrity is required both at the High Court and in the Court of Appeal.
They should not be judges.
Yeah.
They should not be judges.
Okay,
anyway,
we need to
take us home,
finish the
Jamila.
show. I know we're going to talk about KCB, but I think someone on this table is going to mention what our boys and girls have gone through in the past 3 days as they sat for their KCPE